Welcome to another one-take video for Transformation Advisor. I'm Paul Barry, Architect. So today we're going to look at what's new in Transformation Advisor 3.3. So we've got quite a lot in here. So first things first, big focus for TA330 is on WebSphere ND clusters. So now we automatically detect when you're scanning a system with an ND cluster, collect its information, and give you an equivalent deployment configuration in Kubernetes. And we also allow you to deploy all of those applications together into a single Liberty instance. We've extended that capability also to groups. So if you have non-clustered applications, but they do need to be co-located, then you can also deploy them together from a group. When deploying WebSphere Liberty, we now use the WebSphere Liberty operator. We've updated our rules to be more accurate and more reflective of what people are seeing in the field and the actions they actually need to take. And by using the new IBM Pack plugin, we've also streamlined the air gap install. So I'm going to jump straight in. So I'm going to create a new workspace for a new scan. I'm going to create that. And I'm going to upload a scan result. Drop or add the file. And here it is from my system. Okay, so that is uploading now and the recommendations are being generated. And on the left, you'll see that there's a new entry for WebSphere ND clusters. This is a seamless process. You don't have to do anything. If the applications you're scanning are part of a cluster, then we will automatically detect all of the relevant cluster information. So I'm going to click into this cluster, and we see that this cluster has two applications. And in the top right there, we have a cluster migration option, which is when we want to create a migration plan for all the applications in this cluster and to bring the cluster configuration. As part of this work, we've also streamlined the migration plan page itself. So I'm going to start with a single application to show you the changes that we've made there. So at the top, we get some information about our application. Then we get each of the artifacts that you're going to get in your migration bundle. You can now preview these. So we tell you some information about the file, and then we show you the file contents. And I suppose what's interesting here too is we have our nice little comments and we go through all of the different information in the file so you can take a look at the file and get a sense of what it's going to be. And we also show you if there's going to be any application dependencies. It's worth noting as well as that we've made the whole experience a little bit better and we give you clues along the way when you're potentially going to run into some issues. So for example, here we can see that the migration plan defines custom key stores in the server XML file. So that means you either have to bring across your custom key stores or you're going to want to make some configuration changes to rely on certification from wherever you're deploying to. In this particular case, OpenShift, and give you a link to tell you more information. So what we're really saying is that when you go to the stage for OpenShift, you may have some issues to manage your security, and we're flagging that up to you now. So if I jump back to my cluster, so what we have here is a clustered application. You've got plans by WebSphere here, and then you've the back office. And these two applications are going to run together. And when I pick on my cluster migration option here, what I'm going to get is a migration plan that will let me deploy both applications to the same Liberty instance. And what it's also going to do is it's going to identify the configuration you had before and show you what the equivalent Kubernetes capability is that we're going to give you with the deployment. So the cluster in WebSphere was a dynamic cluster that scaled between 1 and 3 members. It had session replication and transaction logging, and both of those were backed by a database. So what we're going to give you in Kubernetes automatically is we're going to turn auto scaling on for you. We're going to set your replicas between 1 and 3, and we're going to be able to connect to those same databases. And all of this deployment information is already embedded in your migration artifacts. So for example, the information on how to connect to those databases and where they are, that's going to be in the server XML. If we take a look at the application cr.yaml, you'll see that we've turned auto scaling on for you between 1 and 3 replicas. In this particular case, we're going to say when your CPU utilization reaches 80%, we're going to spin up a new replica. And then you can make changes in that to match your particular use case and your requirements. But the key thing is we're laying out all of those capabilities and then you can optimize them. It's worth noting here as well, this isn't cluster specific, but since I'm showing this file, here's us using our WebSphere Liberty operator. And when we take a look at all of it, you'll see that you will also have to accept the license, and we provide a link to give you information around how to manage your licenses. And when you accept that license, then you're going to be able to deploy with the WebSphere Liberty operator. Now, so if we go ahead now and we download that bundle, you're going to get a set of links that are going to help you use that bundle. So what we have in the bundle is all the files you're going to need to do different kinds of deployments. You can open up the README, and that's going to go through the steps of how to deploy, for example, your group or your cluster of applications, also how to deploy a single application, and it's also going to go through how to do a deployment using only the binary files, how to do a deployment where you pull in the binaries and the dependencies using Maven, how even to do a build and deployments if you're just starting from the source code. So it's going to cover all of those different scenarios. And what we've done inside in the bundle, so for example, here we're going to deploy a cluster. We want to make things as easy as possible. So if we take a look in the target directory, you're going to see we've placeholder for our application files. If I come down into the lib directory, here's the placeholder for all of the dependencies that you're going to need. And inside your configuration, you've got your feature list for all of your applications, your server XML, which is then going to in turn reference the server XMLs inside in your apps directory. So for simplicity, what we've also done is we've also given you within that apps directory the full migration plan for each individual application. So if you only wanted to deploy some of the applications, you can do that. If you're debugging or troubleshooting, you'll be able to deploy each application individually, then deploy them all together. Okay, so if we go back to home, so that's what it looks like in terms of a cluster, but there we were showing a dynamic cluster. What happens if what does a static cluster look like? So in this particular case, we've already uploaded the data. The cluster we have here, imaginatively named cluster 1, is actually a static cluster. So when I take a look at that, you're going to see your deployment configuration. It's static, so my auto scaling is going to be off. It's got a size of 4 nodes in the cluster. We're going to give you 4 replicas. It is no transaction logging setup. But what's interesting here is that on the WebSphere ND side, it's using memory for session replication. And what you'll see in the Kubernetes deployment is that there's no memories. There's no memory-based session replication. So what we say here is that our in-memory session replication is not auto-configured by Transformation Advisor, and that's because the best practice when we're going to OpenShift is not to have a different session replication setup for each application, is you have a central in-memory session replication, and each of your applications will connect to that. And we provide information on how to go about doing that. And again, it continues the theme of we're flagging up different things that we're not doing for you automatically, or you may need to step in and make some decisions on. Yep, and there's our application dependencies and all the different dependencies that you're going to need. So that's what our static one looks like. It's handled in the same way. It just you end up with a slightly different Kubernetes deployment. Now, one of the other things we talked about in the WhatsNew was the ability to do deployment for groups. So I'm going to go to my data that I've already loaded. And in this particular case, I have all different applications. But some of these applications may need to be co-located. So for example, here, the ACME applications are actually designed to all be co-located because of the way they're set up and configured. So I may want to choose to deploy them all together to a single Liberty instance. So I can simply add them to a group. And you see our group pops up now. And we've got all of our ACME applications in the group. And like before, you get a roll up for the group. So if I look at each individually, you've got 5, 10, 17, roughly 20. It looks like it's 20 days if I deal with them on their own. But obviously, when we bring them all together, they're actually reusing the same code. And it's only 7.5 days. And here I've got my group migration. So I'm able to launch my group migration. And because this isn't coming from a cluster, I'm not going to get a cluster deployment configuration, but I'm going to get all my preview files the same as before, and as well as which I'm going to get all of my EAR files, I'm going to get my dependencies, and when I download the bundle, it's going to have all of this information in it. And so that's it, I think. I think what we showed there was our ability to automatically detect and include WebSphere ND clusters along with the cluster configuration, the ability to deploy groups now to a single Liberty instance. We're using the WebSphere Liberty operator. We have the improved rules, and as well as which we have that improve support for the streamlining of an air gap installation. That's it for TA 3.3. Thanks very much.